Welcome to Mentoring and Coaching our Gaelic players online. So this is an opportunity for you to support your players in the current climate and give you some practical ways you could work with their development. So coaches usually don't have the time to conduct coaching discussions with players. So this is the opportunity for you to stay in contact with your players and at the same time facilitate them to recognize and reinforce their strengths, something we should be doing as coaches all the time anyhow, and help players conduct a self-assessment. So help the players be more aware of what they need to work on and develop and improve, and that they will be able to produce personal action plans they could implement on their own to improve their skills or other aspects affecting their player or playing performance. So as a means of introduction, this webinar will focus on being learner-centered and how the coach will use learning facilitation to support the development of their player. The emphasis of the module is on performance improvement from players aged from 14 to adults. So it's not appropriate really what I'm suggesting to use with players under 14. The challenge for sports managers and coaches is promote self-learning in others. So that's really something we should do, and this what I'm proposing will follow that principle. This presentation, the suggested activities and self-assessment questionnaires and other support material will be available on the GAALearning website afterwards. So, in terms of outcomes, at the end of the session, you will have reviewed the role of the coach in facilitating improvement in player performance. So it's really getting you to refocus and turn to what your role is as the coach in doing that. And then also exploring the differences between mentoring and coaching. These two terms are used interchangeably, so I want to just clarify what is the difference when a player has a mentor and a player has a coach. That you have prepared for an online mentoring coaching session with a player. So help you how you will set this up, and then the next thing then is to be able to implement it online using the guidelines that I'm going to outline. Now, in terms of coaching and mentoring, the reason why they're often used interchangeably is because they share the same range of skills, such as empathetic listening, sharing experience and learning, facilitating insight through reflection, challenging and confronting, which will be more of a coaching role than a mentoring role, advice and direction, supporting access to further development, and acting as a sounding board. So if you have a relationship with a player as a coach, you'll do all these things. If you have a relationship with a mentor, you'll do similar and use similar skills. But let's just look at more detail as what the differences might be. And if we look at this slide here, you see there that under coaching, the only difference really between that and mentoring is performance accountability. So in terms of developing trust and support and guidance and facilitating personal responsibility, the mentor and the coach do the same thing, but the difference is that the coach will hold the player accountable for performance. They will come back and ask them, how are you doing this? Because they expect them to perform and improve their performance and contribute to the team, whereas the mentor has no accountability role whatever. Now, looking at a bit more detail about the differences in terms of, if we look at the focus, in mentoring, the focus is very much on an individual. That is, an individual works with a mentor or chooses a mentor to work with, whereas in coaching, the coach is concerned performance. They expect the player to perform or follow through on agreed action plans. In terms of role, there's no agenda. It's the role the mentor plays is to facilitate and look after the needs and concerns of the player or the individual, whereas in the coaching situation, the coach has a specific agenda. That is, they have decided to address certain areas they want the player to review and act on. In terms of relationship, then The mentor is someone that the player selects. They identify someone who they feel has got expertise or experience or the relationship with and feel they can work with, and they select them out so that they would feel that in some way they could help in their development. But in the coaching situation, the relationship comes with the job. That is, you have a coach appointed, and you're the player, and that is the relationship. In terms of source of influence, as to the influence it has on the individual player. So the player chooses a mentor because they perceive value in it for themselves, and that so that's why they will choose someone that could help them. Now, whereas in terms of the coach, it is the position of the coach. In other words, they'll influence the individual because they are the coach, and they know that the coach can decide if they're selected or not onto the team or whatever. In terms of personal returns, what the player gets out of it is they get affirmations and reassurances and boost their self-confidence and their self-belief, and they learn and they develop. That's what they see, and that's what they feel they get out of selecting the mentor. Whereas in the coaching situation, the coach is concerned that the return will be that the player will be a more effective player, that they'll be a better team contributor and involved in teamwork as well. So the focus then will be the coach is looking at the player in terms of, I want you to be a better player to improve the team as well as improve yourself. In terms of arena, that is the sort of areas of discussion. So people can choose, or a player can choose to a mentor, and they can talk to them about anything in life. So they might know that that is affecting their game in some sort of way, but it maybe is something personal going on in their life or other personal stresses or concerns. So they would choose the mentor maybe on that basis. Whereas in coaching, it's primarily task related. In other words, the relationship is saying what is what are we trying to achieve as a team, and how can we improve in the team. Now, that's not to say that coaches will not get into the arena of life, and of course should, in terms of being aware of the challenges or concerns that a player might have in their personal life, which is affecting them. And in that sense, the coach might have the mentor's hat. In other words, the player sees them as the person he can confide in and trust, and that's okay, and that's good if that relationship happens. But that's usually where the coach is very clearly putting on the mentor's hat there. Now, so who do we coach and who do we mentor? So just to understand, and so this does come, as we mentioned earlier, about relationships. So it depends on the relationship of the player. So if you're the player as their coach, you're responsible to ensure the player fulfills potential. So in other words, as the coach, your job is to make sure the player fulfills their potential as a player and becomes an effective team member. That's your primary focus, and that's what the relationship is with the player. Now, if a player has picked you out as the mentor, picks someone else out as their mentor, the mentor has no responsibility to see the player performs. That they're there as a sounding board and help to guide them and provide advice, but they're not going to point out any consequences. They might make them aware of consequences, but they have no direct input in terms of the players are selected or what should happen if they didn't act on action plans. In terms, you've been requested by the player as a mentor to facilitate them in achieving their full potential as an individual team player. So they will come to you for that purpose, that to help them be a better player and be a better team player. But that is because the players requested that, and that is your role in trying to support them as a mentor. And the other thing is the player has accepted an offer from you to be their mentor. So sometimes, it may be a case that someone might go along to a particular player and offer their service, and maybe they mightn't say it formally, they just might talk to them and maybe have a personal relationship and maybe drop in little ideas and throw onto them, and maybe in that way a relationship builds and you sort of informally start to become the player's mentor. So in terms then of summary, we're looking then at all the skills, and I see these skills overlap. So if we start off here in terms of giving praise and recognition, so both coach and the player and the mentor do the same thing. It's important to give praise and recognition to the player. Coach and mentor need to be good listeners and actively listen. They need to be look to the future, look at the potential, think what the potential is in the player. They need to both be able to build rapport. Otherwise, you can't get into the conversation, you can't build a relationship, so you can help and have an open discussion unless you know how to build rapport. In terms then of giving constructive feedback, so being able to have the skills that to give feedback to the person that the player will accept, because we can give feedback to people but they don't necessarily accept or act on it. So the skill is to be provided in a constructive way to help the player act on it. And then we come here but observes carefully. So observation skills is the key for the coach, because if they want to spot and fix and want to intervene, they need to be very good observers, see what really is going on, so they can have a very focused discussion with the player. So a mentor would need to do the same. Now, sometimes mentors can operate without actively observing the player, but they rely on the player to describe themselves what is going on. But probably an effective mentor in sports would mean that they might go along to matches or go along to training and have a look at them and see what's going on. And then we're providing support and encouragement. So that's both need to do that. So that is part of both their roles. Then we come to this as objective and non-judgmental. So again about a relationship, that the relationship always will be with the player. Will not make a judgment about your performance as such. We're trying to make you aware of it so that you can decide what you need to do about it. And I'm holding up the mirror to them and ask them, consider what's happening and what's going to happen if you continue to do this or whatever. But it's not making some sort of formal judgments on people. And then, of course, the key skill for coaches and mentors, if you want people to think for themselves and take responsibility for themselves, then you need to use effective questioning skills. So you have to become a skilled questioner. Using one coaching to help improve performance. So we're focused now on the role that you're probably more involved with is the formal coach role, and how you can help the player improve performance. So if we are going to help a player improve the performance, we need to understand what things do affect the performance. So we're looking here at the knowledge and skills, the attitude of the individual player. So you need to know the player, what knowledge they have, what skills, what's their attitude in terms of development, attitude to feedback, the level and quality of training the player receives. In other words, what is their background? They're coming to you maybe from another coach, maybe if they're a younger player, the influence they've had with other coaches. So maybe they have not been fully developed in the skills that they should have been. The resources available to the player. So maybe the player isn't developing the way they should, or reinforcing their skills or working on their fitness, but that may be because they don't have the resources. Like, for example, now, people own maybe only a back garden, or they're limited where they can go on the train. But for example, in normal times, they may not have access to a gym, or because they're working away from home. So those sorts of things are not able to work maybe on their fitness or on their skills. The environment in which the player had to operate. So the environment in terms is everybody around them, their colleagues, their players, the club officials, the supporters. So what impact does that have on the player? So some players are more affected by that than others. So we need to understand what the environment might be. The level of support from colleagues or team members. So, are they in a team where they're getting a lot of support from other colleagues and team members, or maybe they're just ignored or isolated? The level of support from the manager or the coach. So we have to ask ourselves, if we're the manager or the coach, what support have we actually provided to this player? Have we actually given the time to them? And often it's a good question for a coach or a manager to say to a player is, how best can I help you? Because often that way we make certain assumptions and we expect players to do things, but they don't really know what's expected of them, and we need to have that conversation. And then there's the hidden motivational blocks of individuals. That is things that's going on in themselves, all of us, things that we have self-doubt about ourselves or self-belief, and that may affect us in terms of how we actually perform. So we need to think of all these things as to why a player is not performing, because these factors could be impinging on it. So in terms then of performance analysis, we need, first of all, to list the players whom you're responsible. So I'd be saying to you as a coach, list all your players out, and because you're responsible and you wish to coach for an increase in performance. So it's good to go through all your players, but you might decide I'll prioritize certain players that if I could get some improvement on. So you're saying, who do I need to work on here, and what do I need to work on? So, or identify a player whom you mentor or wish to mentor to help to achieve their full potential. So if you're listening as a mentor, if you see yourself, I'm very much a mentor, well, I'm not an actual coach, well then you could do this in terms of identify who you're working with at the moment, or other players you might be able to offer your services to as a mentor. Now, this document here is very useful. It was developed by Roger Keenan of Ulster GAA, and it's a self-reflection template, and it's this will be available to you afterwards. So it's a way of you checking out and have a look at all the different areas of how the player performs, their physical fitness, their technical ability, their tactical prowess, their team play, their personal attributes. So what we're suggesting here is this. This is something that you would do for each player. And then what you do is you ask the players to do it. And you then compare your notes and you say, have we got the same view of the player? So that becomes the conversation. So very good if the player identifies and is very self-aware, here's the most important 3 key areas I need to work on, and you think the same, then we can have a conversation about that. Good. But you may find that your perception of what the player is and their perception are different, and you need to come to some mutual understanding about that. But this document would be that sort of tool to help you engage in that discussion. So we're then looking at the strengths and development needs of the players. So complete your assessment of the players using that document. So, and then identify 2 or 3 areas your players could improve or develop. So at the bottom you see that about the key areas of on the document you could work or improve on. And then copy each of this document to your players and let them to complete. So this is something we can do now, send it out to them, and then they can return it to you, and then you can then conduct an online discussion with your players. So this helps in the preparation. So there's no hidden agenda here. You're looking at the same sort of information, and you're using the same language and terminology in terms of discussing performance. So then, when you've done that work, we're moving on to conducting an online coaching session. So the way we go about this is, first of all, you'll contact your players and explain that you wish to provide coaching support during this crisis period. So that'll be whatever means you have communicated them, you'd flag this is what your way you want to help them, to support them. And then you explain you wish them to complete that player self-reflection document, and when they've completed this, to contact you to arrange a video meet call. You can use Zoom or Skype or any of these platforms now, so that you can have a face-to-face discussion. And you estimate the time to be about 30 minutes. It might run over, but just try and at least give the player a sense of how long this is going to last, and they have other commitments or things are happening. But you may find that it may take longer. You just might park it and come back at another time rather than dragging out for a long discussion. So target that you'd give 30 minutes to the player, and that's very important. What you're saying to the players, I'm prepared to give you 30 minutes of my time, each player. So this is a huge investment you're putting in your players. So using your assessment on the player self-reflection, document the preparation for the discussion, and then follow the 6 coaching steps in the following slide. So what I'm saying is that when you've went through the document and you've identified what the areas of discussion would be, then you would use the following 6 coaching steps. Now remember, what's going to be very important here when you're doing the self-reflection document, you will be rating the player's strengths. So it will be very important that you go through that and remind the player of their strengths. In terms of self-assessment, this was Galileo. He said that you cannot teach a man or a person anything. You can only help him or her discover within themselves. So we're saying, and this is how the whole basis is, your job is to try to get the person themselves to discover their potential and their strengths. Here are the 6 coaching steps. So first of all, there's the coaching needs analysis. That is what we've just discussed. That is, you use this document as a way of to do a needs analysis as to where the player need to work on or improve on. The second is the coaching discussion. This is what I'm saying to you in terms of when you have done the preparation and you link up via some media link, and so you have this discussion about the areas. Remember, reinforcing the positive, but also looking at areas you want the player to work on. 3 is mutual agreement. That is, at the end of the discussion, there should be a mutual agreement between you and the player what they're going to act on. And remember, it's not you prescribing what they need to do. You're trying as much as possible to get them to take responsibility, to take on things and act on themselves. And you act in support and help and guide them on that. But you're very much getting them to take responsibility for their own action. And that follows through then onto the action plan. So the meeting ends with an action plan, which means that you are going to come back and review the action plan at some point in the future, maybe a couple of weeks' time or whatever's reasonable, and so that you have a bit of a discussion how everything is working and how things are ticking along. Now, the 5th and 6th points are really recognizing that coaching is a continuous process. You're always coaching. You're always working on the basis of giving recognition. Now, remember the very fact that you contact your players and ask them to do a self-assessment, and you're going to have a discussion, you're actually giving great recognition. It's a very powerful motivator, because you're saying to the players, you're important enough for me to give your time. So that's, by this very exercise, you're actually covering this step. So it's important then, when a player does make an attempt, when he comes back or she comes back with their action plan, that even though it didn't work exactly, even if they attempted it, that's important, because if you don't get if you don't recognize the first couple of percentages of work that they do, you mightn't get much more. So it's important to give that recognition. And follow through is really keeping it going, either formally or informally, checking how they're getting on and continually reminding how good they are, and also things, maybe things how they're progressing with things that they're working on. So in terms of the coaching needs analysis, we'll be saying to ourselves, what are the strengths of the players? So we're trying to, that's important, because we need to feed that and remind ourselves and remind them of the strengths. So what are the key gaps then? So what are the things that the player needs to work on? And then we need to say, what is the ability and motivation of the individual? So we're thinking before we meet this person, are they capable of doing something about this? Maybe it's just beyond, maybe they don't have the ability, maybe they are not a very fast person, maybe they're not that skilled. So you have to say, is it possible for them to improve that range of skill? And are they motivated to do it? And that raises a big question. Sometimes you have very good players, but they're switched off. Sometimes you have sort of average players, but highly motivated, but maybe limited in what they can actually achieve. And then you have to say what coaching style is appropriate for you to use. So really we're saying mostly coaching style is about asking style, but there are times when you do need to tell players if you realize they don't know, but always give them the chance to think it through, ask them their views, their opinions, but recognize in some cases you may need to give direction. And then you've got to say to yourself, is this a mentoring intervention? So maybe what you might discover, what's affecting the performance is more to do their view of themselves, or something going on in their personal life, their self-confidence, and that becomes more of a mentoring relationship. And so you might you be aware as a coach, I need to do that. Or you might find you could suggest maybe someone they may talk to who may be of more help to them than you can or have the time to. Now, in terms then of the coaching needs analysis, the performance improvement is affected by the clarity of the performance standards. Reason most people or most players do not perform is because they're not clear what exactly is expected of me. That is, even in their positions, what is my role? What is expected of me? We assume the players know this. So if you were to ask your players, what are the 3 most important responsibilities of the corner back or the corner forward? You know, what would they tell you? Just if you went through each one of the positions, because we assume that they know, that they've never been discussed with them coming up through their development. And even in terms of we're doing game plans, you know, the thing often we think the people understand, but maybe they don't, and we need to check out. You know, if we say this is our game plan, the only way we will know is ask them to tell us, because if you just tell them, they may have understood, they may not. So clarity of performance standards is fundamental. And the same thing comes in terms of, you know, the players know in advance, what's the criteria that I'm going to select you? What's the criteria I'm going to take you off or substitute you? That there's no second guessing here, or they interpret as some sort of personal grudge, that you know all the time you're working on objective standards. Then also we need to look at the individual's readiness to learn. So are they a person who's ready for this? Maybe they really don't want to know, they don't want to engage in that. And that can become more challenging. The individuals manage our coaching style. So in other words, as well, we need to be aware of our style and our coaching style, what impact that may have on them. So we need to understand what's the best way to communicate with this person. So that's something we have to consider. Now, then in order to facilitate individual make an accurate self-assessment, the coach needs to put individual briefs. So what we're saying here is when you meet this player online, and part of this, of course, is how you prepare them initially, so they don't feel this is some sort of threat, or this is some sort of interrogation or whatever. So you need to reassure them that this is you there given time to help them be a better player. So we need to be able to put the individual please at ease and just reassure them, you know, that you're there in their interest. Set the context. The context is important. The context is that 95% of what you do as a player, you do great work. Well, we're going to focus on things are the things that we would, that 5% would like, that would make you even a better player. So that's, you just put things in context, because if you only mention things we're going to work on development, the player assumes everything is wrong. So we need to make clear what that context is. Ask questions to help the individual reflect. So it's important, this will go back to the skill of questioning. So you've got to think, how can I ask a question? And you need to write them down sometimes in advance. How can I ask make the player think? You know what you're getting at, but you're trying to get them to pose a question in a particular way, which causes them, even there will be silence, that's fine, because you're causing them to think about this. Listen and reflect understanding. That is, when they describe what the challenges for them, or what concerns or difficulties, you know, that you're empathetic with them, that you're able to say back to them, well, so you're not sure if you can do this, or you're going to have difficulty giving the time to this. So try really do this active listening piece so that you can understand what the reality is for them. Give feedback if need be. Most of the feedback should be, say, self feedback in terms of getting them to do self-analysis. But there's times when you need to give the feedback, but you need to give the feedback in a way that the player will accept it. If they start arguing with you or rejecting it, then you have said it the wrong way. The rules around feedback are just describe to the player what you've seen, maybe what you heard, excuse me, and maybe how it affected you. But it's not a finger pointing exercise. And then provide motivation for improvement. So there's what's in it for them. What will they gain by working in this action plan and doing something about this area? So what's a good question? This question helps the player to recognize their strengths. So you need to ask a player questions to help them recognize your strengths. Initially, players are not good at this in terms of recognizing their strengths. So sometimes you have to create this climate where they will take pride in what they do, not being bombastic in any way, boasting in any way, but just that they take pride in what they're good at. One that helps the player to learn more about what they would like to improve. So that's the other question. So it's asking the players, what they would like to improve on. So what you might be able to do is sometimes you have to say, they may not be aware. You might say, for example, in a match situation, you had 9 chances of scoring. So what was the result? So you pose the question. what do you think of where you shot from? Get them to make the judgments, and get them to do that as self-analysis. So good questions are things that are open. We say things like what, when, where. Can you say more about that? Just get them to develop more what our concern or challenge might be for them. And what exactly do you mean when you say? What exactly do you mean to say, I could never do that? Or I don't have the confidence or whatever. So that's about probing a little bit more deeply. May I clarify that what you mean is this? So you're trying to reflect back so that you fully understand what they're saying to you. To summarize, you mean, is that correct? So maybe overall you may say, well, so overall what your concern is that you really don't have the time because of work and family commitments, that you can't give the time that you feel that need to be. So you then say, yeah, that's exactly it. Then they know that you've been listening to them. Now, so the phase 1 questions is identify strengths. So first ask the player to identify this. So in the conversation, so when you opened up, ask the player to identify, maybe from the assessment they've done, the self-profiling, what are their strengths? Encourage them to do that. And if they don't do that, then you need to say it to them. So you need to confirm their strengths. If the player omits what you read as a strength, give them feedback. So if they don't say it, then remind them of it. Should the player list a strength you don't agree with, ask them to give reasons. So sometimes they might overestimate, and you say, well, they haven't a realistic view of this. So ask them to say, well, why do you say that? And so it's not making a judgment of their opinion. Just draw their attention and maybe they could be right, maybe it's something you're missing, but ask them to explain it. In other words, state objective facts and ask the player what they think of that. So in other words, you would state the facts. They may say, well, I'm a very good at dispossessing, but the stats, and that they've maybe not attempting tackles, or maybe the attempted tackles are not working. So you just state the facts and say, well, you attempted so many tackles and so many were successful or unsuccessful. So what do you think of that? So you're just challenging their facts, not making judgments. So the second area then is to identify development areas. So this is where you're getting to the area where you're now coming close to the end, where you're coming to a mutual agreement where 3 areas they would like to develop. So take each area they identified and ask them what would be good performance look in that area. So when you've now looked at the areas, we say, well, okay, here's the 3 areas we need to have a look at. Ask them what they think good performance in that area. So if they say, I want to improve my kick passing. So that's a very general thing. You can say, well, okay, can you put something more specific in that? So are you talking about your foot passing, or you're talking about your hand passing, or whatever? And so what would you call good performance? How many times do you feel that you need to make sure you retain possession? If they're not clear, then you describe what good performance looks like. So if they're very vague with things, then you may need to give them some guidance on that. Then ask them what they can do to improve this area. Say, okay, well, right, okay, so if you want to improve your foot passing, what ideas do you have about that? Now, they may be limited in coming up with that. Some players will be very good at it, others. And this is where you may have to provide the guidance for them. But ask them first anyway. And please note that you may need more than 30 minutes to cover all these 2 areas. So I said earlier, if it's going over half an hour, you maybe say, well, we'll park that for now. We'll come back another night or whatever. So rather than maybe drag it out. But if they agree to go on longer, then you can agree that. If the player does not identify an area of improvement, you should raise the areas you've identified and then follow the steps on the next slide. So in other words, if a player seems to have a blind spot about an area of improvement, then you need to raise it with them. You don't say, well, you have a blind spot. Or you say, okay, just want to talk to you here about your first touch. Okay, how would you describe that? So ask them how they describe that, and say, so maybe you realise that they're not controlling and fumbling the ball the first attempt or whatever. So you need to have the facts so that you just make them aware of that. So, and then maybe if they don't accept it, you may find you just have to tell them. So raising awareness. So the other area then is, as we said, If they feel they've nothing to work on, then you need to follow these steps. Ask the player how they think they perform. As I said, you may say, how do you think you perform in terms of controlling the ball at the first attempt? And so the response will be everything okay, or they're aware that there's something they need to work on. So then if they're fine, well then fine, you can follow on then towards an action plan. But the difficult case is the player who's not aware that they need to improve, or in denial about the performance. They really don't want to accept that they have a difficulty here. So this is then when we need to adjust our questions a little bit more, as in the next slide. So that is where you provide the evidence of what you observed. I mean, this is where if you have video feedback, it'd be great if you can show it to them, but at least if you've noted it, you'll be able to aware to challenge them about this. So then ask them what they can do about it. So if you say, okay, what can you do about it? You know, and if they, and the other thing is, in terms of, if you feel they're resistant to address it, just make them aware what the consequences for them if they fail to improve. So what do you think is going to happen to you, Joe or Mary or whatever, if you don't do something about this? And really what they should be saying, well, that probably means I might be first choice in the team. Yeah, and that's what you say. You're being honest with them. So you say, well, we're trying to get you to be always first choice. So you're trying to give them a good reason as to why they need to go and work on something. So, and if they don't know the consequences, then you tell them. So they may pretend or not want to talk about it, but then you may have to say it up front to them. And then say you may have to find yourself prescribing. The players, and you're saying, well, look, if you want to be continued to be first choice in the team or whatever, this is what I need you to do, and you prescribe it. So that brings us to the mutual agreement. So in order to get mutual agreement, you as the coach need to be open to change and learning. That is, through this conversation, to understand maybe there's things the players said to you, so you didn't realise, maybe they hadn't the support they had, and there's difficulties they're having, and you realise, oh, I need to provide more support here. Accurately reflect individuals' viewpoints. So if you're able to reflect things back to them, you have more chance of getting mutual agreement. And then identify the areas which you need to be resolved, and then make sure you summarise or understand. So what we agreed here, so you summarise what is the areas that you want to develop the action plan on. Now, in terms then of the action plan, the coach must ensure options for improving performance. That is, you need to be aware in advance that you're trying to encourage the player to come up with ideas, but you also need to have it in as well, that if the player isn't aware of it, you're going to have the ideas that they can go off and work on. That the individual knows what and how to improve. They need to know what it is they need to do and how to do something about it, and what will indicate improvement and by when. So there should be a timeline on it. So with some little mini targets here, and how will we know the player's improving, and what support the individual can expect from the coach. Now, most of the responsibility for the action plan has to be with the player, but also the individual needs to know what support can come from you, but not become dependent on you and having you doing all the work or doing a lot of work. They have to take that you're only there to support them on things that they cannot do themselves. That the individual takes responsibility to follow through on agreed action. So that's one part of it. They say, agree, all right, I'll talk to you in 3 weeks' time. I'm off here to do that. That's all we need to make sure that they make that commitment. We've talked about the recognition and follow through. So we're saying the coach needs to recognize the first stages of improvement, catch the individual succeeding. So I mean, this is more difficult at a remote distance now, but as a principle, if we're aware that they try and focus on the things that they're attempting and succeeding and making little achievements with, spot and fix. Maybe they send a video or something, maybe we'll be able to give some feedback or whatever. Again, a lot of this, again, would be a lot easier done when it's face-to-face. Review progress informally and formally. So it may be a telephone conversation or a text or whatever. So in other words, keep a continuous follow-up. Right. In terms then of just to review and what we've been through here, coaching and mentoring is facilitating the player to make an accurate self-assessment. So that's what this webinar has been about, is making you aware of that, is to get the player to make an accurate self-assessment. The primary focus should be on the positive aspects of the player and performance. Reinforce the positive as much as we can. The more we reinforce the positive, the more they'll have confidence to tackle the things they find more challenging. The coach must prepare by conducting an assessment of the player and have evidence for their rating, not just an opinion. So it's not some sort of vague opinion. You know, you need to have facts. So that's why you need to do your homework so that you can produce facts to the player. The player must be given the opportunity to conduct their own self-assessment. That's what we're saying, given that self-profiling document. The coaching discussion with the player is to question the player and, where possible, get them to come up with solutions. That's what the whole discussion is about, is getting them to come up with the solutions if possible. In some cases, it may be more appropriate to be direct with the player. We mentioned this earlier. So sometimes you do need to tell the player, but all the time work off the principle this player can solve this themselves and can take responsibility to solve these issues. But sometimes you do need to be directive. If you want any follow-up support, there's my email address and my telephone number, and if you want to make contact with me, you know, I'd be happy to do that if I'm available. I'll certainly come back to you. And if you need to talk to me prior to discussion with a player, I'm pleased to help. So if you are working with a player and you feel you want to have a quick word with me, run something past me, I'd be delighted to help you if that should happen. So I would appreciate feedback from you where you've conducted sessions by completing the questionnaire in the following slides. There's a questionnaire in the following slides, so the way you have a go with this to give us some sense of how it worked for you. And so there's the sort of thing you can do. What was the performance issue? What went well? What difficulty you encountered, etc. So if you're going to contact me, you know, just use this little guideline prior to the conversation so that we can sort of cut to the chase. So that's all, folks. Thank you for your time. Gormil Mahagat.